Welcome to my home. I have a bad lighting environment right now. One second. I have these like rays of light, which is it's a good song, but not what I want to have happen during my lecture. I guess it's not so bad. It kind of has like sort of a celestial thing going on. I'm gonna start my stopwatch to make sure I don't go over time. That's the stock market. Here's the phone. All right, there we go. Here's the stopwatch. All right. Okay, so we were talking about super memes in the last lecture where like a whole ton of different strategies, devices, food, views, aesthetics are sort of co-inherited together as a block in the form of super memes, like political views or nationalities or religious groups. Tons of aspects of culture are basically taken in a giant bolus and tend to be inherited. So like with very little variability, if individuals have religious parents that are of a specific religious identity, their children are very likely to exhibit that religious identity. It's infrequent that individuals reared in one religion eventually come to occupy, endorse, or believe in a different religion. So same thing with political parties. Oftentimes, offspring of humans exhibit, or usually they exhibit the similar political views to their parents, or at least they develop into them later on in life. So there's usually some episodic move towards liberalism in young adults, and then they tend to move into more conservative views as they get older. However, if you were reared by liberal parents, you're more likely to mature into a liberal type of view of the world, and same thing vice versa for conservatives. So there is fidelity in terms of cultural inheritance of these mega memes, and these memes do compete with each other for attention, for votes, for lives, and it is a property of these memes that there's only so much space inside of our brains. There's only so much space. There are only so many people on planet Earth. So these memes do compete with each other for attention in our minds and for assimilation. And so the memes that tend to stick around are the ones that have stay power, that have fidelity, that are able to replicate effectively. And although there's no molecule per se that's auto-catalyzing these events, memes, social things about us, are capable of undergoing a similar kind of process to natural selection, both at an individual level, memes sort of like, should I put this much salt or this much salt in this food? So like a very minute sort of level, to macro trends like competition between religious views across giant landscapes. I remember I was shocked the first time that I went to India by how many mega churches there were. I was like, oh my God, like Baptists are incredibly abundant in southern India. I was totally impressed by this. And there was competition for bodies to attend various kinds of religious services in even remote regions. Anyway, so I was impressed by watching this competition. Anyway, there are people who advocate looking at the evolution of memes and super memes in a Darwinian selection sort of viewpoint. It's imperfect. The parallels are not identical, but they're close enough that the argument has to be articulated aloud in a social evolution class. There are a lot of skeptics of cultural evolution as a process that is akin to Darwinian selection. And some people even say that it's not even scientific to do so, but there are enough successful cultural evolution specialists that I need to talk about them in this course. All right, need to talk about this concept in this course. Okay, so which memes stick around will depend on what kind of host they reside in, right? Different kinds of animals are going to have different kinds of pleasure systems. The tastes, the mechanical stimuli that they enjoy will change between different species. And so in turn, we should expect that the cultural units that they favor, that embed effectively in the minds of those hosts, will be different. And that will also be true based on the sensory systems, which is a highly genetically influenced sort of aspect of the host. Pre-existing cognitive and sensory biases, which can be Again, determined by the genes of the host, but could also be determined by the development of the host. So individuals raised in different kinds of environments might have different kinds of sensory biases or pleasure systems, reward systems that they find appealing. And more to the point, the current set of memes that individuals have inside of their brains in the population will change what kinds of new memes are successful. So, I mean, you can imagine something like humor, like the kinds of jokes that are likely to adhere to a culture and proliferate will be determined by the established sense of humor that is what is the most abundant kind of sense of humor in that population. But humor itself is a cultural phenomenon, right? So the kinds of cultural practices that are already there inside of the host's brain will change what kinds of new kinds of memes can possibly emerge and flourish. And so it creates interesting positive feedback loops that take even small initial starting differences in sensory biases or cultural differences between populations of people and cause them to spin off in a totally different set of cultural directions. Quite impressive. Does that happen in the animal world? We don't really know. Probably not. If it does, it probably occurs in like primates or like cetaceans, whales, and dolphins. Maybe cats have elaborate cultures that we just don't really know anything about just yet. But anyway, it suffices to say that it does occur in humans. It is not that rigorously examined. There are only a few hundred people on planet Earth that study this sort of phenomenon in this sort of framework, and we're still in our infancy in figuring out how it all works. If there are patterns that are generalizable across different cultures all over planet Earth. All right, so people have argued that sensory biases, something very primitive, I shouldn't say primitive, primal about being human, it might be responsible for why so many different world religions very early on in their genesis exhibited parallelism in their iconography, the sorts of symbolism that they select, the kinds of mythology that they produce, the sort of stories of the genesis of prophets and about their development and about even hero tales, right? Even if they're not religious, contrasting mythologies and legends from all across humankind have a high level of parallelism. Many scholars believe that this level of parallelism is not because they were secretly all derived from the same primitive story, that's sort of like very ancient story that sort of developed into different trajectories and took on different specifics in different cultures, but in fact that there's something about the human brain, something about who we are as an animal that bias what kinds of stories and tales we find appealing, what kinds of memes and mythologies are meaningful to us, what sorts of icons are appealing. But I mean, I don't mean like literary icons in this instance, I mean like visual icons. What kinds of iconography are appealing to us, right? Like sacred threes are very common across world religions, and using trees as symbolism, like a little, like tree of life or tree of fertility or winter solstice trees, are a shared icon that emerge again and again and again. Some people think that that's because we have sensory biases as an organism to view trees as relaxing and something of safety. It also could just be that like trees are all over the place, and so we see them all the time, and so we drew them. And so anyway, so there are less sophisticated, less highfalutin ways that this parallelism in symbology might show up, but at least it needs to be considered that it might just be that we like these things because of our pre-existing biology. All right, innovation. Where does culture start? Where does it change? How does it accumulate? It starts because there are innovators. Innovators might just be individuals that screw it up. like they didn't mean to mess up this meme. They didn't mean to try this different strategy. They just tried to copy it, but they weren't a pre-existing strategy, but they just flubbed it in some way. And then that started a new kind of meme if it was successful. And if it was unsuccessful, they didn't do that again. They tried to recopy the pre-existing meme and try to replicate its success. But if the individuals make a mistake and the mistake turns out to be fortuitous, well, guess what? They're going to increase the odds that they're going to deploy that kind of garbled meme just from a trial and error, I guess it's error and success sort of process. Alternatively, there can be individuals that are consciously manipulating an existing strategy and turning it over and trying subtly different variants of it, and that process, which could be more deliberate, could give rise to a superior meme that can replace an old one in the brains of its host and potentially, eventually, in the population at large. So innovators. There are animal innovators that are just figuring things out, that are pretty good, they're pretty smart. And the potential for innovation varies, as you might imagine, based on the traits of the host. Some host species and individuals are much more likely to be innovators than others. So what is an innovation? An innovation is creating a new idea, method, procedure, or device. It's some element of culture that you're just going to create that's new. You didn't copy it from anywhere. You didn't just copy the greats. You came up with something that was different than what has ever existed before, to the best of your knowledge. Although oftentimes people innovate the same the same bit of new information because they don't realize that somebody else has come up with that. Happens in humans, happens in animals, but anyway, so innovation still creating something new that you have not witnessed before. Older individuals might be innovators, but young individuals can be innovators as well. So there's oftentimes a relationship between age and innovation. And that relationship can vary based on the particulars of the biology of the system, and then whether or not individuals become ossified and inflexible as they age, or whether or not as they age, they have accumulated enough information about these memes to have to experiment with them more confidently, or something like that, right? So if innovation requires a lot of pre-existing knowledge and expertise, then older individuals will tend to be innovators. The wizened old man or woman like working in a lab somewhere innovating because they've acquired a lot of specialized expertise that's required for innovation. That's certainly true in many human societies because a lot of innovation requires a lot of pre-existing knowledge in human societies. Yes, the Silicon Valley and blah, 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 and young, brilliant people, but even those youngins, like in their late teens, early 20s in Silicon Valley that are these geniuses, are still, extraordinarily well trained, and it took them a decade or more of sophisticated education to get them where they are. Anyway, so age. Sometimes as you age, you ossify and you become less flexible, then younger individuals can be especially great innovators. Usually there's either an accumulation of innovation with age or a concave down relationship with age. So very young individuals are not great innovators. Intermediately aged individuals are good innovators, and then ancient individuals or wizened old individuals are less adept at innovation. See, now the lighting looks really good. I don't have these like spectral. I mean, isn't it vain that I have a shiny forehead, but whatever. Isn't it vain that I'm considering my spectral environment while I'm giving this lecture? I just don't want to be like a creep with overhead lighting with looking sinister, villainous. Personality, yeah, no joke. Your personality type will influence whether or not you're going to be an innovator within your population, or your probability of being an innovator. Bold individuals that go check out new areas that could be risky, or resources that might end up being poisoned, those individuals are much more likely to be innovators. They're also more likely to die. But if there are just enough of them around, some of them will come up with innovations periodically that are special, that can be transmitted to other individuals. Exploratory individuals, non-neophobic, individuals that don't fear new things, those non-neophobic, bold, exploratory individuals are much more likely to figure out new salient features of their environment and then proliferate the memes that they acquire throughout their population. So look at these capuchins here to the right-hand side. These individuals are engaging in potato washing. So these primates have figured out that if you wash the potato of sand and detritus, it's much more pleasurable to eat. You're not eating a bunch of sediment, which is not desirable. So long ago, some focal individual in this population figured out how to wash a potato. And then other individuals observed that behavior and started copying it. And now it is a persistent meme in several populations. And we've been able to document the genesis of this potato washing behavior and its proliferation within a generation. So the interesting thing about cultural evolution is that it can happen very swiftly. It can happen within a generation. So Darwinian natural selection at least takes a small number of generations to really see genetic change. Cultural evolution can happen incredibly swiftly. Look at human morality. Good gracious, like the most sophisticated, erudite, forward-thinking, socially progressive individuals of 100 years ago or 200 years ago, if you read their writing today on things like race, would be something like, would they just be gibbering racists? You would, by contemporary standards, we would think like they would be members of like the Ku Klux Klan. But for their time, they were incredibly sophisticated writers. Over the last 50 years, the zeitgeist of morality towards race, gender, LGBTQIA entities within the human population has evolved so enormously that within one generation, culture is almost unrecognizable on certain kinds of fronts, right? You don't have to go to science to see how rapidly the human culture changes. You can go to our morality and see how swiftly it changes, if those things are independent. Intelligence. Yep, no joke. Smart animals are better at innovation, right? So like if you have the capacity to use trial and error learning and observe conspecifics around you. Sociality, social intelligence, which is not always, so there are many kinds of intelligence. Social intelligence is a specific kind of intelligence that you're attending to the information of others. But actual intelligence, social intelligence, and a lack of neophobia are major contributors at an interspecific level of determining species differences in innovation. Things like crows, not just British crows aren't particularly savvy, but like Corvidae, the family of crows, are wonderful innovators. They're incredibly intelligent animals. Magpies and crows and jays, rooks, ravens. These animals are responsible for a huge amount of innovations. If you look across all of avian diversity, bird diversity, corvids, the small difference in spelling, big difference in meaning. Well, by the way, the first month and a half that COVID-19 was around, I was calling it Corvid-19 because I used the word corvid in my life much more than COVID prior to the last 12 months. Anyway, so corvid birds, I was about to say COVID birds. Corvid birds are, because of their intelligence, because they attend to social information of others, because they can occur in flocks, and because they are non-neophobic, they're not afraid of people, they're not afraid of new aspects of their environment, are real mega innovators in the avian world. So like go compare that to like predatory birds. Most predatory birds are like, hawks and owls and things like this, although they're majestic and cool looking, are not major innovators. So like they're doing the same thing they've always done. It's just now they're doing it in the backyard rather than like an intact forest. Behavioral conformity and its benefits. So there's an optimal amount of conformity you want to have in a group. And a conformity is basically just you do what you see others doing. That is behavioral conformity. When you see other individuals doing something, you do the same thing. Sometimes that's great. Sometimes that's bad. So let's talk about what is behavioral conformity and why is it good, when is it not good, and how does it influence things like culture. All right, so the Goldilocks level of behavioral conformity. I like these creepy old like plate illustrations from like the early, at the late 19th century or early 20th century illustration in children's books. In my office back in McMaster University, I have a close friend that was is a creepy children's book illustrator. So she draws things with pen and paper. Like on the right-hand side, I have several of them in my office. If you were my students and you were alive and you were seeing me in my office, I have a bunch of art in the office, and I love creepy children's book art. Anyway, so she's drawn several illustrations for me. Neither here nor there. All right, so behold, Goldilocks on the right-hand side here, and the three bears, right? Goldilocks, if you're not familiar with this reference, is basically like she infiltrates a home of three bears, and she uses all of their belongings, and she's very choosy about what sorts of like beds she likes and food she likes, et cetera, and she always likes the golden intermediate option. So if a Goldilocks zone is always like a golden intermediate zone relative to extrema, that's most favored. So extremes are disfavored, a centrist thing is favored, a centrist element of the environment is favored, and Goldilocks was famously very particular. I think, I don't know whether the original story she was chased off by the bears or consumed by the bears, or bear, I guess bear is plural already, but But it seems to me like if it were real life, she'd totally been maimed. Anyway, so if you have too little behavioral conformity inside of a social group, then no one's copying each other. And if no one's copying each other, then even when there's innovation, it can't proliferate through that social network because no one's copying each other. No one's attending to each other's behavior. Or if they are, they're not copying it. So if there's too little conformity, then you don't get cultural dynamics like cultural evolution and the spread of memes. If you have too much conformity, you only are copying other individuals and you don't innovate for yourself at any moment in time. There's no innovation, then whatever by accident, whatever meme proliferates through the group is going to stick around. You're just going to copy each other and you're going to copy the most common thing that you see, which means that there's very little garbling or the generation of new memes. And if there is a generation of a new meme, no one's really likely to copy that. They're more likely to copy the most abundant meme in the population. So what do you want? You want a Goldilocks level, an intermediate level of behavioral conformity to generate cultural evolution dynamics. So you want to have some individuals that innovate, they garble, they try new things, they come up with specific solutions, or, God, I'm going to have a nasty cough for a second. Here we are. Whew. I didn't sleep that well last night. I got up at like 1:30 and go back to sleep. So like I did my run this morning, but I still feel like I've been run over. Anyway, so Goldilocks zone, some individuals innovate, and when they innovate, most innovation attempts don't produce anything useful. The pre-existing meme is usually a superior solution or more favorable solution or pleasurable solution than most garble attempts by innovators or mistakes by innovators. But occasionally, the garble produces something better, much like mutations do in genes. And then other individuals need to copy that. So there has to be some hot chains in idea space that are exploring new frontiers, and then other individuals need to have a propensity to copy things that they see, or at least try them on for themselves. So it provides them an opportunity to vet the existing meme that they have relative to some new variant of that meme. Sounds good? And again, vetting has to happen in order for culture to be accumulating in complexity or improving the performance of its host consistently. Hosts have to be vetting within their brains or between individuals with familial fidelity in the spread of memes. There has to be competition between memes in order for the culture to be improving the performance of its host consistently, the way it has in humanity and the way it probably does in some Diet Coke version of that, although I would love a Diet Coke right now. In the animal world. All right, group selection and behavioral conformity. This will be the last little bit that we'll cover in this lecture. All right, so behavioral conformity and adhering to the memes, the cultural phenomena of your group is an important feature about group selection. It's certainly in people and then probably in animals as well, but again, it's not a topic that's very well explored. So conformity behaviorally, maintaining cultural fidelity to the cultural units, the memes that you see around you in your community, allows you to identify who's in your community and who is not in your community, which is useful. Stranger danger. Stay away from this new individual that's foreign to you because you don't know what its motives are, or whether it means you harm, or it could mate with your mates or steal your property or whatever, like your territory or your resources or whatever. Eat your offspring, blah, 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 blah. Animals have in-group out-group morality based on familiarity and relatedness, if those things can be distinguished from each other. And humans do this both, oh, my family's first, and then everybody else. How do you identify your family? We have the following things that we do that are uniquely us, about our personality, our view of the world, or whatever. But they can also be at the community level, right, or the city level, or at the national party level. Look at American football. On the right-hand side here are the Baltimore Ravens, and then just to the left of them are the Pittsburgh Steelers, famous rivals in the NFL, all right? Football doesn't do anything for most football fans, right? It doesn't like get you food. It doesn't like, it doesn't help you acquire mates. I mean, I guess liberally, if you define it broadly enough, it can do all of these things, but narrowly, it's watching a football game is not going to acquire you a mate just by watching the football game, right? It's not going to help you make money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But identifying culturally with one of these teams becomes an important element of camaraderie and identification of in-group, out-group morality in humans. Two people wearing two Steelers jerseys that show up at a bar together to watch a game, they're suddenly best friends yelling at the screen together. Two people showing up at a Baltimore Ravens game, at a bar with Baltimore Ravens jerseys on, suddenly are talking to each other like, they're good old friends, right? But two individuals wearing different jerseys. One's wearing a Steelers jersey, one's wearing a Ravens jersey. Well, they'll probably have little playful, catty things they say to each other. But oftentimes, I mean, certainly in British football, real football, people get into fights over these things. I mean, watch what happens when somebody's injured in football. Like, if you're in a Steelers game in a bar and you watch a Baltimore Ravens player get like severed in two, like everyone in the room's like, "Woo! That guy just died," or whatever. Yeah, get him off the field. We don't want him. We don't like that person was seriously injured, and the room is just like super delighted that this person is hurt. Over what, right? Like, that person is still a person. Why are you devaluing them in particular because they're wearing a different color jersey? I mean, what is it? The fact that we as humans love in-group, out-group morality. It innervates so much of our culture. This nation versus that nation, this religion versus that religion, this political view versus that political view, this football team versus that one. The fact that we can watch someone basically receive significant amounts of brain damage and laugh about it or celebrate it really tells you something dark about in-group, out-group morality and the importance of small differences in culture and cultural identity in generating wildly different moralistic views about what certain kinds of individuals are worthy of respect and which ones you have exhibit a level of schadenfreude towards or celebration of their demise or pain. Versus one of the members of your team gets injured, like, this angel, like, oh no, I hope they're okay. And like everyone in the bar, like someone starts quietly sobbing behind you because one of the players sprained their ankle. You're like, that person's still a millionaire. They're still just fine. They're gonna have 6 weeks off because of this sprained ankle. Like, why are you sobbing? Like, another person just isn't gonna be able to recognize whether or not the lights are on or off in the room for the next 2 weeks. They're gonna be a rutabaga, and you were like laughing your ass off. Like, I mean, this is ingrained in our psychology, and it has an evolutionary origin. It must, right? So our cultural identity tied to these kind of colors or practices or things that we learned from our parents or we saw on the news or our friends told us in school become a major way of how we dice up the world. This is our group. That's that other group. We are entitled to this kind of treatment. They are entitled to that kind of treatment. And the width of an eyelash of differences in culture, a coloration scheme, whether or not you have 3 little weird stars or some sort of cartoon crow on your shirt, changes what these people are entitled to. Are there animal analogs to these things, non-human animal analogs? There almost certainly are, but we haven't discovered them. They're not a focal element of behavioral ecology. Possibly in evolutionary psych or in human behavioral ecology, they're considered more rigorously, but no one really has done the sort of comparative studies that would be necessary to like begin to map this sort of trait back through the evolutionary tree of life. Diversity. So it's all well and good to have everyone in your group conforming to a specific kind of view, right? That's great for being able to figure out who's in our group and who's not in our group. The problem is that if every single member of the group is deploying the exact same strategy, what happens if the environment changes in the future? And the environment is invariably changing. In the Triassic, there weren't poles. There wasn't a north and south pole, and the world was 10 or 15 degrees Celsius warmer, right? I mean, the world be a-changing all the time, year to year, over millennia, certainly culturally as well. Your competitive environment, the kinds of innovations that are being bombarded around you all the time. The world is always changing. And if everyone in the group is deploying the exact same kind of behavioral strategies, the exact same kinds of cultural strategies, memes, then it means that there's a chance Then in the future, you're going to roll snake eyes, and you're going to encounter an environment where that strategy is not going to do well, right? So the converse of the benefits of behavioral conformity, being able to identify in-group, out-group morality and a cultural identity, that is probably good for like protecting your family and things of that, and which has evolutionary implications. The converse of this is that oftentimes in a dynamic landscape where the future is uncertain, at the group level, it's beneficial to have diverse strategies that individuals are deploying, to have a sort of like a stock portfolio effect, right? So like we don't know what the future is going to be. So having lots of different kinds of memes floating around in our society, in our family group or whatever, increases the odds that in the future, at least one of these memes will do well against the future set of circumstances that we're presented with. Versus if we were all on one single type of strategy, presumably some years we'd do great, and some seasons we would do great. But in a different set of environmental conditions, we would all do terribly, wither and die, right? So it can pay to have diverse memes present in your group, like a diverse stock portfolio investment strategy when the future is uncertain. So it basically helps ensure that in the future, at least some of our strategies are going to be able to do okay, and we're not over-reliant on a particular kind of strategy. Don't put too much money in REITs, because in the future, people might have a hard time paying their rent, and those real estate investment trusts are not going to be able to pulling in all the rent money, and that means they're not going to be paying your dividend, and that means that the value of that stock is going to go down. COVID might happen. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that, and oh yeah, well, look at me, ha ha ha, and it actually coincides with the next segment. I meant that all along. All right, so I will see you guys next Monday. But oh, I'm also going to see a fair number of you in office hours tomorrow. I will post that to the announcement section of Avenue rather than the Avenue mail, which evidently is a different kind of email system entirely and nobody uses. All right, take it easy, guys. Have a good one.